Welcome to Between the Vines. My name is Kevin Martin. I'm here with Jennifer Phillips-Russo with the Lake Erie Regional Grape Program, and we have a special guest, Dr. Terry Bates. And we're going to talk about some of the work that's been going on and the season that we've just had. Great to have you with us, Terry. Jennifer, anything you want to say before we get rolling?
Yeah, I'm hoping he's going to talk a little bit about what happened this last growing season and what can we expect next year. Thanks for joining us, Terry.
Oh, I'm happy to be here.
For those of you listening, I think Terry's going to share his screen on the video version. So we'll try to cover that the best we can, but feel free to check out our website for some of these visuals if you want to.
Can you see that?
I can.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so yeah, there's been a lot of questions about, hey, what are you guys doing on the research end? We haven't heard from you in a while. And everyone knows that we've just finished up this big, efficient vineyard project and all on precision viticulture, how to measure, model, and manage spatial data in our vineyards, and how do we practically use that for variable rate management in the vineyard. So, I'll talk a little bit about that and kind of move on to what we're doing next. So, advance my slide. Okay. So for all of that to make sense, let's go backwards and start talking about like what we've done over the last 4 decades. And that will help frame our conversation on what we're going to do for the next 3 to 5 years in terms of research. So okay, we just published a paper in AJEV talking about our Concord crop load model. So there's a lot to this chart on the right. And so I just want to back up. So I put this on here for my buddy Keith Striegler. So shout out to Keith, who's a viticulturist out in California. And he keeps asking me to publish information on Nelson Challis's West Tier factorial. And it's like, we have published that in little bits and pieces in different areas. And this chart includes a lot of data from the West Tier, plus a lot of data from our fruit thinning studies, where we prune grapevines to more fruiting buds than we need, and then we thin back to match it with the crop season to maintain vine balance. Okay, so let me explain this chart and try not to make this into a 3-hour conversation. So on the bottom, we have pruning weight, so vine size. And so we know that vine size drives yield, right? The old saying that you can't get a big crop on a small vine, right? So as on the bottom, it's as vine size goes up, our yield potential goes up. So yield on the other axis. And so that's our basic pruning weight to yield relationship based on different pruning practices that we do. So the world of Nelson Challis was 30+10 balance pruning. So even if you had a very big vine, you're not leaving very many fruiting buds, and the yield potential only can go so high. Kind of on the polar opposite is leaving 120 nodes. So this would be our machine prune, hand followed up to leave somewhere between, 110 to 130 buds on a vine. And that's so we're trying to set a very high crop potential in relation to the vine size that we have. So, a 3-pound vine could potentially have a 12-ton per acre crop on it. And then we have these different ones in the middle, 60+10 balance pruning, and 100 fixed nodes on a vine. And I think that's where we live as an industry. We talk about grower pruning as being 80 to 100 buds. And so we kind of live in between the 60+10 pruning and 100 fixed nodes. Okay, so the third part about this chart is it's a vine balance. I want to say quality factor, because quality, it indicates not a quantity, but we actually now with our Concord crop load model have turned it into a quantity, right? A Ravaz index is your yield to pruning weight ratio. And the point of the paper, so we published this paper, it was 12 years of data on both pruning and thinning. And it was to look at, we talk about vines being overcropped, undercropped, and balanced. And that's you kind of have a quality factor to that. But what happens quantitatively, what happens in the vineyard? And this chart shows that. So if I have a 2-pound vine and I'm hanging about 7 tons per acre, those vines are balanced, meaning that the fruit gets ripe at about the middle of the season, and I neither gain nor lose pruning weight. So that's our definition of balance. So if a vine is undercropped, I gain pruning weight, and the fruit ripens like first week of the season, right? I hit 16 bricks right at the start of harvest if you're undercropped, and I gain pruning weight. That's why Nelson Chalice loved that practice so much, because by not leaving a lot of fruiting buds, the fruit always got ripe, and I maintained or gained vine size in the vineyard. If we go with our machine pruning, we can be overcropped a lot in many seasons. And so what that means is your fruit does not get ripe early in the season. It gets ripe, like it'll hit 16 bricks, but you're going to have to wait till the last day of the harvest season for it to hit 16 bricks, which should be resonating with some people this season. And you lose pruning weight. So you lose yield potential for the next year. The whole point about leaving a lot of buds and then thinning the fruit is that, like at a 2-pound vine, if I have 11 tons per acre, I assess the year, I thin the crop down to say 8 to 9 tons per acre. That balances the vine in that you hit 16 bricks in the middle of the harvest season, and I don't gain or lose pruning weight. I start with a 2-pound vine, I end with a 2-pound vine. So so let's talk about what we are, where we live as an industry is, again, we're somewhere between the orange and the green line in terms of our pruning practices. And we're somewhere around, so the chart on the left is the industry yield data in tons per acre. So we're living in the 5 to 6 tons per acre, right? And we get this bounce that goes up and down. Over the long haul, the trend is going up, which I think is a good thing for the industry. I think our vines are a little bit healthier, and we're leaving more buds, and we're trying to match that crop with the growing season. But still, we're in this 5 to 6 ton per acre average, and there's a lot of bounce. Some people will call that a biennial bearing. And I think we're in a self-imposed cycle, vicious cycle, where if the crop is low, the vine size goes up, we leave more buds, which overcrops the vine, we drop pruning weight, then we come back with a lower yield potential, right? And we get in this vicious cycle. And that's where we see this up, down, up, down, up, down. So last year, we had small vines. Why do I know this? Because we went out and collected pruning weight. We also matched pruning weight with NDVI. We know, like, as an industry standard, our pruning weight is low, somewhere between 1 and 2 pound vines. So we had a low crop that drove our pruning weight way up last year. Everyone talked about great wood. I got 2.5 to 3 pound vines. And I'm like, yeah, finally, we are in a situation where our vineyards are in good shape vegetatively. So growers said, great, I'm going to leave, I'm going to prune to my 100 nodes. I'm going to have 8 to 10 tons per acre, and they're going to stay balanced or even undercrop. No. The prices were high. People said, nope, I'm going to leave more buds than I need. Then what happened? We had a really good set and good berry weight, and that drove the crop size up even further. And we had all these reports of, 12 tons per acre, 13 tons per acre, and they got
20 tons per acre
of the season. So what can we expect for next year? We just drove the pruning weight down again. So everyone this time of year is talking about, man, there's no wood out there. It looks terrible. I have a lot of green shoots, on my canes. We've driven it back down, and we're going to drop right back down to, kind of our industry standard for next year. So, right, we live here in this vicious cycle of, and this is driven by economics, right? I'm trying to make money. So if my vine size goes up a little bit, I want to take advantage of that and have a higher crop. So we're in this vicious cycle, and then we just drove ourselves up and back down again for next season. The point of all this long-term research is, right, you want to, for higher, sustainable, long-term yield, you need to drive your pruning weight up. And then you need to balance the crop load to maintain that pruning rate, right? We want to be in a 2.5 to 3 pound vine. We want to be in this area of 8 to 10 tons per acre where it stays balanced and I maintain that 2.5 to 3 pound vine. And that's easier said than done, right? It takes inputs. Again, it's driven by economics. To make and maintain 2.5, 3 pound vines, you have to put money into your vineyard. And that's not necessarily the economic situation we're under. Keep having this conversation at the lab of where does viticulture science meet economic reality? So what are you gonna think, Kevin?
Yeah, just to play like devil's advocate, sort of. Obviously, there was extra pressure this year to overcrop a little bit because prices were not just healthy, they were historically high. So one could make the argument that I don't really care if I have a smaller crop size next year because I drive down vine size because I don't trust that these prices will stay. But I think what I would add to that would be just how close to the edge we got and how some people cross that line of not receiving any revenue.
Yes.
Because we can't pick the point on the chart with any sort of precision. And that's what drove I think some of the challenges of this season. I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, I have a 3 pound vine and I want to make sure it's 2.5 next year because I want a slightly larger crop this year because of price. But you can't do that with any level of precision. And then you end up in these situations with much more extreme results that carry a lot higher risk. So
yes. Those are great comments.
Yeah.
I have like several different, yes. And I like that you use the word precision, right? So one way to handle this is to stay conservative. And again, that's what Nelson Chalice did. I always talk about conservative viticulture with Nelson. It's like, he always lived down here because he didn't want to get into playing it on the edge and having to be precise. But that's kind of the world that we live in, which leads to a big project on precision viticulture. So my next comment to your comment would be that this chart it's very general for like, we're talking about like broad strokes, but every vineyard block, every vineyard operation is a little bit different. And so we even do this on our research farm. There were some blocks that we played it. We should have thinned the crop down and balanced the vines, and we didn't. We said, let it ride. And we struggled to get that fruit ripe. There were other blocks where we had thinning projects going on. And yes, we thinned the crop, they maintained balance. And we're out there now collecting pruning weight, trying to show that we fit this model.
Yeah.
So every vineyard operation is different. And when you look at your different vineyard blocks, you're going to say, okay, this one is a healthy block. I'm going to push it. I don't care if I lose a little pruning weight this year. Okay, this block over here is, lower pruning weight. I need to baby that one a little bit and bring the pruning weight up and the long-term yield up. Or I have a single block, and if I can measure the variation within that block, I can then do variable rate management. This model drives those decisions, which segues into our project on precision viticulture.
Yeah, there were a lot of questions about thinning this year and pushing this year, and just totally, how about not your entire vineyard? Just pick a little area, like you said, where you have healthier vines, you always make sugar, and then push it there.
Yeah, and I think for the most part, if you had a 2.5 pound vine and you were in the 10, 11 ton per acre range, they're overcropped. You're going to lose vine size. You're going to lose a little bit of yield potential for next year. It was the vineyards that were like 13, 14 tons per acre that they probably look terrible right now. And they're really going to be hurt. And yes.
Sorry, you were segueing into your next section.
I know. I think it's a real, it's an important issue. It's a challenging issue, is that where we're trying to use the viticulture science and fit it with our economic reality. And we make those decisions in our vineyard to try to whatever. revenue, stay in
Right.
business and make money. And some years you make more money than other, and that all factors into your decision process.
So I think we have like two realities, and this might be a segue for you, and also kind of what Jen was talking about. One of the things I saw was that people who did no crop estimation this year, or very little, or just sort of looked, had larger errors than really I've ever seen them have. Probably mostly driven by not just the berry size issue, but also set. They were making mistakes there because they were not used to seeing clusters as large as they had. So I was seeing things like people thought they had 5 to 6 ton to the acre that had 12. And I think where you're headed are, so the people who did a really good crop estimate, they were looking at a crop that, and it varied a lot, but a lot of them were in that range of 10 to 14 tons. And some of them sort of discounted their crop estimate and thought maybe it wasn't going to materialize. Some of them didn't, but in either case, there was also an issue with berry size, which we're probably not going to solve because that's just not something you know at 30 days. But adding to the precision and reliability of your crop estimate so that like the sample's better and you know what's going on within blocks, yes, that berry size error might still exist, but the difference between just sampling and not sampling was just enormous this year. So if we can improve that sample, you're going to pull yourself way away from having too much risk with that information.
Well done, Kevin.
Yeah, like a lack of
manage
confidence in the crop estimation was half the problem, I would say, for people who had a problem.
The old saying is you can't manage what you don't measure.
Right.
But you got to measure something first and then know what you got, and then you can go from there.
Yep.
Okay. So segue into measure, model, manage. So the Efficient Vineyard Project was all about developing, using sensors in the vineyard. So a lot of this was off the shelf stuff. And in some cases, like with the Carnegie Mellon image sensor, it was something that we developed from scratch. So to use proximal, which means in the vineyard, not drones, not satellite imagery, just sensors that are in the vineyard, to measure soil, canopy, and crop characteristics. So based on our conversation that we just had, vine size, soil, water, and nutrient availability drives vine size. Vine size, which can be measured, vine size is a measurement of canopy growth and light interception, which we're getting at with NDVI sensors. And then crop size. So through our crop estimation sample, we're using spatial data to get a better crop estimation sample. And then we're using yield monitors to actually look at this pattern of yield in the vineyard. So different sensors for soil, so we can manage soil to drive up vine size. We measure that vine size with NDVI, and then we try to translate that into yield, and or use variable rate fruit thinning to balance that vineyard so that we don't gain or lose. We manage our vine size the way we want with crop load, right? Either I want to maintain that vine size, or maybe I want to undercrop some vines to drive vine size up, right? So measurement of soil, canopy, and crop. We look at that spatial data, we model it, we validate NDVI sensors with pruning weight. So we can translate an NDVI map into a pruning weight map, again, which goes right into our management. And then create prescription maps, spatial prescription maps. So if I want to thin a vineyard and I want to do it variable rate, I can do that with machinery. That's kind of what the whole Efficient Vineyard Project was about. And you can, you can go to the Efficient Vineyard website, you can read about this stuff, see where, what we've accomplished on that project. And we can give, other seminars on more specifics. But I want to talk about, we have 3 new projects going on that kind of fit in these 3 silos of measuring, so developing sensors to continue measurement of things, modeling data, so the MyEV tool, most growers, including myself, I'm not a precision ag specialist. I don't know how to get the most out of my spatial data. So we try to develop a software tool that's easy for growers to use, that you can map your spatial data, make sense out of it, and use it for your management, and then do variable rate management. in a vineyard. Okay, so project number one is a USDA Specialty Crop Research Initiative project led by Marcus Keller at Washington State University. So vineyards across the country all have this question of, we know that vine nutrient status, so whether that's soil nutrient status and then translates into vine nutrient status, differs across the vineyard. And we want to do variable rate nutrient management, again, to maintain or drive our vine size up and increase our productivity. And for most of the season, you don't see nutrient deficiencies in the vineyard. And we want to be able to, before you see nutrient deficiencies in the vineyard, we want to have a sensor that can measure nutrient status. So like, oh, you know, these vines aren't showing any nitrogen deficiency yet, but they're getting close. Well, let's give them some more nitrogen, versus another side of the field where the vines may already have high nutrient stat or high nitrogen status. We don't want to apply any fertilizer or very little, some maintenance dose of nitrogen fertilizer. So to be able to do that variable rate, well, the first thing you have to do is measure that difference. And we're trying to use sensors to do that. So we've hooked up with engineers, imaging science engineers at RIT. Jan van Aert is the guy who leads them, and Rob Chancia is a postdoc in his lab who's been doing most of the heavy lifting on this. Him and his team, they come out and they fly these drones over our vineyards, and they have different sensors. So it's not, you know, the drone is cool, but what's even more cool is the sensor technology that's on the belly of these different drones. So they're using what we call visible, near infrared, and shortwave infrared sensors. So very similar to our NDVI sensors, you know, that you've probably all seen that we drive through the vineyard. They have three, you know, red edge and near infrared wave bands that collect. So it's just three wave band areas that they collect, and we translate that into an NDVI, which is, so we use it to get an idea of vegetative growth in the vineyard. In this case, they're using what they call a MicaSense sensor, and that has 5 wave bands. So, and they're different than the wave bands we use for NDVI. Visible NIR, so from the visible wavelength into near infrared, and then they call it SWIR. Shortwave infrared is higher wavelength wave bands. So again, so you're just trying to get a bigger picture of the electromagnetic spectrum.
Gotcha.
And the point is, it's looking at the vines in wavelengths that we don't see with our eye. So can we see nitrogen deficiency or vine nitrogen status at these other wavelengths that we can't see with our eye?
Terry, may I ask a question?
Yes.
So when is the timing of all of that? Because if the vine is only taking up the nutrients it needs the 2 weeks before bloom and 4 weeks after, how can you correct it if you see it? You're like, are you taking that pre-bloom? Are you taking it bloom and then applying if you see?
Okay. So it's incorrect to say that it's only taking it up in that window. It's that when we put fertilizer on the ground, we've done this with nitrogen. So this is work we did with Lei Lang Chang. We put nitrogen fertilizer on the ground mixed with a non-radioactive isotope of nitrogen. So we could determine how much nitrogen was coming from like mineralization from the soil and how much nitrogen was coming from that fertilizer. Okay. And we say that the most efficient time for that fertilizer to be taken up is in that active growth phase, like in the month around bloom, the 2 weeks before, 2 weeks after bloom, is when we put the fertilizer on at that time, it's most efficient. But it's taking up nitrogen throughout the whole season. Anytime you have leaf area out there and the transpiration stream is going, you're picking up nitrogen. It's just, it does it more efficiently during that active growth phase. So, yeah, I don't know how to answer so we are scanning the vineyard at bloom and at veraison, because that's typically when we collect tissue samples at bloom and veraison. Right. It would be, yeah. Okay, so here's the history. make a long story out of it. So the recommendations at Cornell for a very long time has been to collect petioles at veraison. And that stems from a lot of work that Nelson Chalice did with potassium deficiency in Concord vineyards. So there's very good reason for that potassium in the vine starts high at bloom and then it drops down. Could be on the screen, and then it gets low and flattens off around veraison. So it's moving very fast at bloom and it's pretty stable at veraison. So Nelson said you can more accurately determine if a vineyard has high potassium status or low potassium status at veraison, at that veraison sampling. So if you want to compare your tissue samples with our standard values, veraison was better than bloom. And on the flip side of that, the recommendation in California is to take tissue at bloom. So we have these questions going on. What's better? Is it to take it at bloom or veraison? And what's better? Should we take leaf blades? Because there's some recent research that has come out of Oregon that says, at least for nitrogen, leaf blades are better than petioles. So there's very good reasons why the recommends developed the way they did for different varieties and in different regions. And we're kind of trying to put all that together now and say, if I was going to sense a vineyard, do I sense it at bloom or veraison? And should I collect petioles or leaves to give me a good indication of what the vine nutrient status is to match up with our sensor development? So a lot of research questions kind of going on there.
Very cool.
Sorry for the long answer. Okay, so what we're doing in this project is we have a Concord block and we're trying to create nutrient deficiencies based on, the other nutrient work that we've done in the past. So we have a 1 acre block and we have a 1/4 acre where it's nitrogen deficient, a 1/4 acre where it's potassium deficient and magnesium deficient against a healthy control. And again, RIT, they send their drones up at bloom and veraison, so they get a spectral signature of that vineyard. We collect leaves and petioles at bloom and veraison on individual vines. So I'm not collecting one sample for like this whole magnesium deficiency block. I'm collecting a separate tissue sample for that individual vine and that individual vine, and we have all these analyzed for their nutrients. And then RIT can match up their spectral signature with what the tissue values are actually saying. And when we get these positive relationships, we can then turn that spectral signature into a nitrogen status for that vineyard. So the whole point is I want to be able to either fly one of these drones over my vineyard or take the information we have on very expensive sensors that, you need to have special license to fly and make a very simple in the field sensor that you mount to your tractor and you drive yourself, just like we do with NDVI, and be able to get a nutrient map of your vineyard. And that'll probably be different. The wave bands that we need are going to be different for nitrogen, different for potassium, different for magnesium. But again, we can take expensive stuff and make cheap, simple sensors. You probably could have multiple ones going through the vineyard at the same time, give you multiple maps. Okay, yeah. And I guess the only thing I'll add is we've actually done this. Have flown the drones over like a 6 acre Concord block, and they give us a nitrogen map. And then we can say, hey, I would do variable rate nitrogen applications based on this map. That's a lot of science to get down to something very simple.
That's kind of cool.
So
Is there an economic factor to that in that study?
Yeah, well, there will. Yeah. I mean, the economics is if I apply variable rate nitrogen, can I use less nitrogen, so save dollars that way? Or do I use the same amount of nitrogen that I've always been using, but I apply it more effectively or efficiently? I give it more where it needs it and less where it needs it, and drive the vine size up. If nitrogen is my limiting factor for vine size in a particular vineyard, can I make a 2-pound vine, a 3-pound vine, and then take advantage of that with higher yield? And that's going to be your economic return.
Right. perhaps more so with some of the other nutrients, but also nitrogen. But like one thing I think you probably see as vineyards start to manage more intensely and make more investments in fertilizer is things just getting out of balance. And that's where without some sort of variable rate management, you start to, potentially decrease vine size because of the nutrients you're putting on or quality or something like that. Rather than simply just saving fertilizer. Probably the biggest area might be trying to identify pH, which this isn't going to do directly, but potassium is going to be another, where I think our industry would focus, just like Shawless did, because it's 75-80% of what we spend on fertilizer is potassium.
And we saw potassium deficiency where the vines were overcropped this year.
Of course.
Which goes back to our chart that we started talking at the beginning. If you're overcropped, you're more susceptible for potassium deficiency. And that nothing drives vine size down faster than potassium deficiency. So where you saw black leaf in your vineyards this fall, your vine size is probably tanked.
So yeah, we'll get into it. Maybe we'll get into it later. It's
okay.
a different question, but.
So thank you for joining us today. That concludes our nutrition talk with Dr. Terry Bates and the SCRI project led by Marcus Keller out of Washington State. Please join us again next week or coming up for the next episode for more of talk with Dr. Terry Bates into more things that came out of the My Efficient Vineyard program and robotics and a lot of futuristic stuff that we have coming down the pipe for you.
Yeah, we'll be back next week right before our holiday break, and then we'll take a 1-week hiatus. So again, join us next week. Thanks for joining us this week. We'll see you soon.
Take care.